Hello friends, book lovers, and whoever else is watching this. I'm Emily at Midnight. Welcome to my channel. I'm trying something new with the lighting and the camera angle. I'm not loving having the microphone in the shot, but let me know what you think about all of it. I'm trying to figure out the best vibe for my videos. And since it is just after Halloween, I figured the kind of darker, spookier vibe could be good, but I don't know if it'll be good all year round. So let me know what you think about my current setup, and let's get into the video. If you've been following me since last fall, then you might recall that I read Can't Spell Treason Without T, my first ever cozy fantasy book, and I kind of hated it. Honestly, I disliked this book in such a specific way, it made me think that maybe cozy fantasy just wasn't for me. But I've decided to give cozy fantasy another shot, at the recommendation of pretty much everybody. People kept telling me that I had to read Legends and Lattes by Travis Baldree, which is basically the OG of cozy fantasy. People kept saying it was definitely gonna change my mind, and so I did. And drumroll please, I loved it. It was really, really fun and quaint. It really hit all of the things that I was hoping for in cozy fantasy. You might recall in my review of Can't Spell Treason Without T that a lot of my issues with it were what is this thing called cozy fantasy and what makes it unique. If you haven't seen that review, definitely click on, I think it's this corner, and watch it before you watch this review. Basically, my main takes were that the cozy fantasy genre didn't make a ton of sense to me. This book promised me a lot of cozy, a lot of fantasy, but basically no high stakes. And I got some cozy. The pacing made it feel tiring. I got the fantasy, but I got some super high stakes with this. And so I was like, I don't really know what this cozy fantasy thing is about and if it can really deliver on what it promises. But I did read Legends and Lattes, and it actually did deliver on the genre promises of cozy fantasy. So I'm going to do a little spoiler-free review of Legends and Lattes, but reviewing this book alone isn't why I wanted to make this video. This book was really, really great, but reading it after and as a response to this book made me realize some things. Namely, there are a lot of similarities between these books, but the way that they approach everything, this book does so much better than this book. And so I really want to do a video comparing the two of them and explaining why Legends and Lattes worked when Can't Spell Treason Without T didn't. But before I get into that, a quick review of Legends and Lattes by Travis Baldree and what I liked about it. So my quick review of Legends and Lattes is that it was such a fun book. It really delivers on the cozy aspect. You follow around Viv, who is this adventuring orc who is basically retiring from her days as hired muscle. You see, toward the end of her time as a hired muscle, as a vigilante, she discovers this thing that the gnomes sell, I think it's the gnomes, that's called coffee. And it's this bean juice, which sounds weird, but it's actually delicious. So she decides to pick a town that doesn't know her as a traveling muscle and set up a shop, sell some coffee, and see how it goes. She wants to sort of reinvent herself. And it's so fun, okay? The parts of this book that are all sort of cozy, setting up shop, making friends, it's slow-paced, but it's warm, and the people that you meet make it really interesting. It's very full and lush and just cute. There are some really great friendships that she makes. Everyone's sort of nervous about the friendship, but they just realize they get along and want to spend time together, and I really like that about it. Then, obviously, because it's a book, there has to be some tension, some rising action. There is. But the tension matches the promise of the genre. See, there are threats, but they are smaller scale threats. It all comes down to what Viv's goal in this book is, which is setting up a shop and establishing a cozy life. There are things that come and threaten that, but they mostly come on the smaller scale or threatening her shop, threatening the everyday life things that we all deal with, rather than a massive dragon threat or the threat of an entire kingdom coming after you and your girlfriend, which we get in this book. As I said, I did really, really love this book. I'll probably give it 4 stars, maybe even 5, but my review of this book out of the way, I did promise that I have something to say about these two books together. When I was reading Legends and Lattes, thinking about Can't Spell Treason Without Tea and how it was cozy fantasy, but I didn't super like it, there were some things that I noticed that were just interesting to me. Reading them sort of back to back, or at least one in light of the other, made it abundantly clear that there are some major similarities between these two. The kinds of similarities that don't feel like chance. Now, let's make this very clear. I am not accusing anyone of plagiarism. I'm saying there are major similarities between these two books that made it such that I felt like I couldn't not compare them. I think actually it's probably impossible for there to have been plagiarism. Again, not saying that there is. I don't think there was. But part of the reason that that isn't possible is because Legends and Lattes came out in February of 2022, and then Can't Spell Treason Without Tea came out in September of 2022 that same year. And I think getting a book from concept to production and release during that time is super unrealistic. It's possible, but again, I don't think that their similarities necessarily come down to anyone copying or being inspired by anyone else. I think they were both trying to do the same thing at a similar time, and the details to which they were trying to do the same thing was really, like, surprising to me, very hard to ignore. Now, before I get into all of these similarities, I think it is worth noting that I'm gonna be getting into a lot of the details of these books, so if you don't want them spoiled for you, go watch a different video of mine until you've read these books, okay? Alright, the first and most foundational similarity between these two books is that they are both sapphic, romance-adjacent books. They both have two women who are vaguely in love during the story, but it isn't the main focus of the story. There is romance, but it's not a romance book, if that makes sense. In Legends and Lattes, it's sort of a book of prolonged glances and whispers of what if. While you're going about the story, you can tell that they both have feelings for each other, but haven't really been able to admit it to each other. And it sort of comes to a head at the end, but it isn't the focus of the book. But they do eventually admit their feelings to each other. It's very cute. I really liked it. Where in Can't Spell Treason Without Tea, the romance between them has actually happened long before the book starts, which I think is a bit of a shame, personally, but it is a super reasonable choice to make. We have our two characters. There's the Archmage, I think, and the Palace Guard. They fell in love like a year or two ago, and they've had some secret rendezvous, and then they decide to run away together and start a tea shop. And so the will they, won't they of the romance is long past when the story starts, and they're already in a relationship, which is fine, but especially because this book is in a series, I do think it is a bit of a shame that we didn't see the budding romance. There are a lot of other main similarities between these books, including the main character saving up enough money to be able to step away from their current life as it stands and start a new, more cozy life. It so happens that they both start idyllic shops in small towns where they sell a drink and one other thing, be it coffee and pastries or tea and books, which again is just a funny similarity where I'm like, wow, this is kind of the same thing. They both choose specific small towns for specific geographical reasons. Viv chooses a small town where no one will know her as a vigilante and she'll be able to sort of establish herself anew. Whereas Reyna and Kianth choose a town that is between two countries in contested territory, so it would be harder for the queen that Reyna is a guard for, it would be harder for her to come and extradite her basically for deserting the army. Both books, however, have an additional element that they choose the town they go to because of their strategic position on a magical ley line. Fun fact, if you watched my review of Can't Spell Treason Without Tea, you will learn that this was the first book that I ever read that talked about ley lines, so I didn't know what they were. I do now. I've read other books with ley lines. Both of these books have plenty of details of building their shops, taking them from basically stables in both instances, I think, and turning them into bustling little coffee or tea shops. The process in both books takes, I would say, up to 40% of each book. Both books start at the end of our characters' previous lives. Can't Spell Treason Without Tea follows sort of both characters starting a new life. It's mostly Reyna, but Kianth is trying to separate her life as an individual and her life as the Archmage, and so it's kind of a starting point for a new life for her as well. This book mostly follows Viv. We do have Tangerine Baldree, the succubus, in the story, but it isn't so much her starting a new, well, it is. It is her starting a new life. She's trying to establish herself as a respected member of a community rather than someone who has the kind of magic that can persuade people, and therefore no one trusts you because they think they're always being persuaded. So I guess you could say that this book is also a new beginning for Tandri, as much as it is Viv, but we do have just the one POV character in this book, where this one has two. Oh, this is funny. I wrote in my script that both books have a large animal friend, which is just a funny detail. In this book, the large animal friend is pretty central to the story. I believe it's a hippogriff that Kianth, the Archmage, rides. But in this book, we do have a large animal friend as well. It's a dire cat, which I don't fully understand the idea of dire cats and dire wolves, dire hounds. There's this concept in fantasy that I feel is underutilized, and it's been fun to read about. I've seen it in now Wheel of Time and this book, where there's just like a larger than normal animal of this kind with special powers, and the powers are always kind of vague, which makes them very interesting. They're very mysterious. But anyways, those are the big animal friends in both books. We also have a big part of both of these books being that the protagonists need to convince the local power to allow them to run their businesses. So in Legends and Lattes, we have someone called the Minstrel, who is basically the local gang leader that everyone has to pay off in order to have their businesses. This is obviously framed as protection money. And Viv, the protagonist of this book, thinks, I'm a large orc who spent most of my life being the hired muscle. I don't need protection money. Hopefully I can just avoid being on the minstrel's bad side and can also avoid paying because that money could be hiked up at any time. It's just a bad situation. Then on this side, in Can't Spell Treason Without T, there are two governments in the town. As I said, the location of the town is between two countries in contested territory, so there is a appointed government leader from both countries for that town. And so there's a lot of tension there, and they're trying to get permission from both of these leaders to run their shop, and they're not working together. Basically, if you have his permission, then you can't run the shop because I'm the leader here, kind of an idea. But there's actually more similarities to it than that, because where Legends and Lattes has the minstrel, which is basically the crime in the area, the gang that controls the area, that Viv has to work out how to run a business despite their control of the area. This book has gangsters that used to run their business out of the barn that they took over to make their tea shop. And so then they have to do some trickery with them as well. So there's sort of two layers. In this book, the minstrel serves both purposes, but this book has both government and sneaky people that they have to sort of figure out how to navigate running a shop despite their influence. And we also have, in both of these books, the main protagonist rethinking the ethics of their previous lifestyle. Viv spends a lot of this book thinking about the ethics of being hired muscle, of being a vigilante, and whether that's what she really wants for her life. And in this book, we have Reyna, who spends a lot of this book thinking about whether it was a good or virtuous thing to be a personal guard to a wicked queen. I have thoughts about this. I think I put them in my review about how anachronistic that whole perspective in this book is, where Reyna's like, the queen would rather let me, a guard, be killed than herself. How rude, she's so wicked. And I'm like, that's your job as the guard, to die for the queen? But okay. Oh, and then on the other side of that same coin, in both of these books, the secondary lead is viewed as basically just one part of themselves, one characteristic of themselves, and they're trying to break out of that mold and be seen as a whole being rather than a caricature. In this book, we have Tandri. As I said, she's a succubus. She's been viewed mostly just as someone who lures people and uses her powers to convince them. She wants to be seen as a whole individual who doesn't manipulate other people, but just goes about a regular life like everyone else. And in this book, we have Kianth, who is the Archmage and is seen almost exclusively as the Archmage. She isn't really viewed as someone who has a life. She's expected to be at everyone's beck and call and be sort of the Pope of the magic realm, where she has to go and solve problems for everyone else and isn't really expected to have much of a personal life. The final thing that I wanted to point out as a similarity between these two books is that even the epilogue is structured very similar. See, the epilogue of both of these books is a flashback to a pivotal first encounter. In this book, we have Viv's first encounter with coffee. We get to see her doing that first experience where she drinks it and she's like, this is kind of weird, and then it grows on her and she's like, wow, this is lovely. This could change my life. And then in this book, we have the scene where Kianth and Reyna meet each other. And that does change their lives because through their love, they both decide to take a step back from the direction their lives were going and pull together to create the life that they were both actually looking for all along. So in both books, the epilogue is a flashback to that first pivotal encounter. Now that I've pointed out a lot of the similarities between these two books, which I hope you can see as I point them out to you, it's a lot. There's a lot of really similar things between these two books. So now I have to answer a very important question. Why, when I read this book, did I not like it? But then when I read this book, I liked it so much. But they're doing a lot of the same things. What is it that Legends and Lattes did better than Can't Spell Treason Without Tea? Let's get into it. The first thing that I want to point out is that a lot of things in Can't Spell Treason Without Tea were just solved by our main character, Kianth, the mage, being super powerful. She just can do stuff. You know, she puts together the whole barn with her magic and she exhausts herself, but she puts it together into this whole shop. And honestly, it's kind of a boring montage because she just does and does and does and does and it's done. There isn't a whole lot of push and pull and stress and strain on that, and it feels very just so. Legends and Lattes, on the other hand, has more in-story reasons for why things are working out, or at least that's what you're made to believe. And so it doesn't feel so just so. See, in Viv's last raid, before she set off to open her coffee shop, she took the something stone. I don't remember what it's called, but it was something that she got from this evil queen thing that she defeated. And the stone is described as something that gives you great luck or brings to you what you deserve, basically is what it said. And so at the beginning of her adventure with the coffee shop, Viv takes this stone and buries it under the main flagstone of the building of her coffee shop so that it can bring her good luck and the things that she deserves coming to her, basically. So Viv spends most of the book thinking, wow, these things keep working out. I'm so glad I have that stone. Wow, I made another friendship with someone that we can be mutually beneficial to each other. I'm becoming a part of this community. Thank goodness I got that stone because it's letting me do all of these things. And so as you're reading the book, there's a reason that things keep falling into place. But beyond that, we do have, and this is another spoiler, I hope if you haven't read the book, you've clicked off or you don't care. In the end, the stone is revealed not to be like, oh, the magic was in you all along, but the stone does do some of that, but it is revealed that the stone brings to you what you deserve, basically. And so it was bringing people to her that were like-minded, and she built those friendships herself. She built the coffee shop herself, but it was gathering people toward her that she could make real connections with, but it wasn't because of the stone, it was because of who she was. Then the person who stole the stone from her in the book, which again, if you've read the book, you know what I'm talking about. It's basically implied that he's gonna have really bad people come upon him all the time because he's such a bad person, which I really like that description and that concept. It's a very karma-istic view of life, which is fun. The next thing that I feel Legends and Lattes did better than Can't Spell Treason Without Tea is the small stakes. In Can't Spell Treason Without Tea, the stakes just aren't small. I mean, for the first part they are, like, oh no, you wore yourself out using too much magic to build the tea shop, and now you're sick. Oh no, I'll take care of you if you call those stakes, you know? But then we really get into the story and there's like multiple really high stakes. Like the evil queen that Reyna used to work for wants her back and wants to get revenge on her and is definitely gonna go hunt them down. And they know this, they hear about it as it goes on. In the end, that does happen. She comes and faces them. And that's a pretty high stake because that's life or death. That's like a whole kingdom trying to enforce life or death on you. But beyond that, that isn't even the only high stake in this book, okay? There are a lot of high stakes in this book. There's a whole other thing going on with dragons. They're right near Dragon Country. They're basically at this center point between Dragon Country and one kingdom and the other kingdom. And apparently someone in that town stole a dragon egg from the dragons, and so the dragons are like going through and raiding the city over and over again, and there's definitely gonna be a dragon war at some point if they can't figure out where the egg is, and like maybe a huge threat to humanity, basically. Big stakes, okay? This is not a small stake book, which is what makes it not cozy fantasy, in my opinion, and what made me think that cozy fantasy was just a genre that couldn't fulfill its promises, because this book did not fulfill the promises. Legends and Lattes, on the other hand, did, okay? The stakes are actually small. I kind of explained this a little bit when I was giving my review of the book, but the stakes are just for Viv's business. The whole story is about her trying to rebuild her life. She has this specific vision, this specific business she's trying to run, and there are several threats to her business. There's the minstrel, who poses a threat to her business specifically, and whether she'll be able to have a business in this specific town. She could still have a coffee business somewhere else. They're not trying to kill her. They're just trying to take away her business. And then there's the whole threat against the stone. She has a former party member who used to go on adventures with her, who is the one trying to target the stone and take it from her. That's not going to kill her, probably, hopefully. It's also not going to be a threat for all of humanity or even the peoples, because this is obviously they're not humans, but it's not a threat for all of the peoples in this book. It's just a threat on what Viv perceives as the key to a successful business. So the stakes are proportionate to the plot, which I really appreciated. And it made it fun. You know, I cared a lot about this business and this one specific thing that I wanted her to succeed at. Another thing that I liked better about this book is the romance aspect. See, I'm a romance girly. I like me some romance. And so the fact that this book skipped the whole falling in love thing was just a bit of a shame. And this book doesn't have that much romance in it, okay? A lot of it is just prolonged glances, longing, but you get to see it. You know, I love sitting in the longing. And so I really appreciated the way that it approached not being a romance, but still including the romance and letting us actually see it as it happens. It makes us care about them and their relationship so much more. The next aspect that I want to discuss is how Legends and Lattes approaches found family and the people in the story. It's hard sometimes when you read a book like Can't Spell Treason Without T, and I really don't want to shit on this book too much, but I didn't like it. But you read a book like this, and they're trying to introduce these new friends in the community. They're trying to build a rich community and make you care about other people in the story, to build a sort of found family. And they just didn't do it very well. And it's hard when someone just doesn't do it very well and you don't have a lot to say. It's just not done very well. I just didn't care that much about the characters in this book. I didn't see the quirky, lovely things about them that made me want them and their specific hopes and dreams to succeed. Because actually, now that I'm thinking about it, most of the other characters in this book, the side characters, the found family, don't have specific hopes and dreams. They're just kind of there. And maybe that's ultimately what the problem is. They're not very fleshed out. They don't feel well-rounded as side characters. In Legends and Lattes, the side characters, the community that Viv builds around herself is rich. It's lush. These people mean a lot to me because we see so much of them. There's the little rat thing that cooks, and just the way that he's characterized and the way that he makes these pastries, it's so very full of love. And there are these specific details to him. He mostly doesn't talk, and so when he does talk, you're like listening so much closer for what he's saying. And there's the hobgoblin, I think, who helps them build the shop, and he's just interesting, you know? He's well fleshed out and you care about the things that he cares about. They really mean a lot to Viv. The author spends a lot of time making the relationships rich. As you read them encounter Viv, you want them to succeed for Viv's sake because you want her to make friends. You want her to make friends that are doing okay, but you also care about them as individuals. And so, yes, just the side characters, the found family, everything about it felt much more rich and lived in this world. This next one feels like a personal beef, but I do legitimately think that it is a critique on the specific story. But Viv's desire to start a cozier life and retire from her previous life is just so much more realistic. She used to be someone who people paid to do things. She fulfilled all her contracts, and then she moved away to where no one knew her and tried to start a new life. People do that. That's a thing that people actually do, and it's kind of realistic. Like, will news eventually travel that, ooh, she's killed people? Probably. But she's also this massive orc that has a massive sword, and so I think people make assumptions about her anyway. But it makes more sense for her to be able to integrate herself into a community very easily, establishing a new life for herself. Whereas Raina's desire in this book, in Can't Spell Treason Without T, to start a new life, doesn't make any sense. Okay, I mean, it doesn't not make sense, but it doesn't make as much sense. She is like one of the main high up guards for the queen in the country that she's in. And she's like, what if I just run off and start a new life. Sure, definitely do it. Run off, start a new life. If you don't like where you're at, okay. But the likelihood of that being successful and also that being a cozy experience, very, very low. If you do manage to successfully escape and bury your trail, you're still going to have like anxiety every day of your life about the queen finding you. The likelihood of her looking for you is pretty high because you deserted, you know all the secrets, you know like all the secret tunnels and stuff. And so you're a liability. The desire to like be a businesswoman in what is part of still that same country is just kind of a silly idea because you'll be like a pillar of the community, the local economy. People are gonna know who you are, they're gonna figure out who you are. Where I feel like it would make so much more sense to like go even further than that, go into a completely different country, the far ends of another country, as far as you can, to try and not get found and not be recognized. Don't prop yourself up as a pillar of the community. Kind of be a hermit, or not, if not a hermit, okay? Just try and hide things, change things about who you are and recognizable features. And she doesn't do enough of that, in my opinion. And she also just has an overly optimistic view based on her circumstances. Like, this book should probably be a thriller of her trying to escape the queen, or she should have a different background. You know, it just doesn't make sense. The stakes promised do not match the circumstances. So those are the things that I think Legends and Lattes did better than Can't Spell Treason Without Tea. That's not to say it is the world's most perfect book, though. There are certainly flaws with Legends and Lattes, as there are with many books. One particular critique that I have about this book is I felt that the minstrel aspect of this book wasn't approached that well. The minstrel didn't have a super specific reason for changing her mind about Viv, and that made it feel a little just so, a little convenient. But I don't hate it either. Basically, the former party member of Viv's who steals the stone, the minstrel becomes aware of them and just doesn't like them and is like, I hate that person more than you, and so I'm going to support you to push back against that person, which is a very mobster or gangster sort of thing to do, so I'll give them that. But basically, they come to an understanding that the way that Viv pays off the minstrel is through pastries, which is very cute. But it felt a little like an odd conclusion to that plot line. I felt like maybe Viv could have saved the minstrel's life, or there could have been just a stronger connection between the two of them, but that's neither here nor there. Plus, if we get talking about weak resolutions, this book doesn't stand a chance compared to Legends and Lattes, because the whole reason why the queen backs off on Reyna is Reyna comes to the queen and is like, I've got it. I know, I've been big braining this whole time. My whole gig, the reason I ran away and didn't tell anyone was because I was going to seduce the Archmage and convince her to work just for you. Which just, what? Why did the queen believe this? Like, she kind of acted like she really believed it, which I feel like she shouldn't have believed, but been like, okay, you're lying to me now, but at least I can use this as control over you and can actually pull the Archmage's strings a little bit here. I don't know. A very shaky resolution to a book. And it is only book 1 of 4, so that's something. Maybe there'll be better resolutions. I won't find out. Maybe you will. My concluding thoughts for this video are, these are two very similar books, trying to do something that is, quite frankly, too similar, in my opinion. I don't know how they ended up being so similar, but Legends and Lattes does it just so much better, leagues above what Can't Spell Treason Without Tea did. Neither of these are technically standalones, they're parts of series, and I haven't read the series belonging to either of them. I do actually want to read Bookshops and Bone Dust, which is the sequel to Legends and Lattes. I probably will. It sounds like a lot of fun, and the book was good enough for me to invest more time in this series. Where Can't Spell Treason Without Tea is somehow book 1 of 4. I don't know how they can get something interesting enough in the next 4 books to keep this going that long. They all came out within 3 years. From first book to 4th book, 3 years, which is really fast. And it makes me wonder about the quality. So no, I will not be reading the rest of this series. You can if you want to. But if you came to this book for a recommendation and to get the entire book spoiled for you and still read it, then I would recommend you read Legends and Lattes. It made so much more sense and followed the genre expectations that I was told to look for in cozy fantasy, which this book did not do. I've given cozy fantasy a second shot, and I liked it a lot. So thank you for encouraging me to give the genre another chance, and let me know what other cozy fantasy books I should read next. It's kind of a blossoming genre, and so I don't know that many books that fit in this genre, so please give me recommendations of books that you liked. If you liked this video, please give it a like and subscribe. It's a free way that you can support my video and boost my channel, and I would really appreciate it. I've done a fun two-part series recently that I think you might like that is all about reading two different books with the same title called We Used to Live Here. So if that sounds interesting to you, you can watch those two videos. And I also did a pumpkin spice themed video right before this where I read 3 books with pumpkin spice in the title and had a lot of fun with that. It's very fall vibesy. So even though Halloween is past, if you're looking for Thanksgiving vibes, Thanksgiving romance, mystery vibes, go check out that video and let me know what you think of those books and if you've read them. Feel free to follow my Goodreads, Storygraph, Insta, etc., all of which are Emily at Midnight, except for TikTok, which is like Emily_at midnight or something, but they're all linked below, so you'll find them one way or the other. Have a wonderful day, treat people with respect, and pick up a book.